After a forbidden kiss, the millionaire and his mistress break all the rules. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The September sun cast long shadows across the pristine marble floors of Kane Industries' executive suite, where Liam Kane stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, adjusting his platinum cufflinks with practiced precision. At 42, he had mastered the art of control, from the perfect Windsor knot of his Hermes tie to the meticulously organized schedule that governed his days. Your 4 p.m. with the board has been moved to tomorrow morning, and the car for Napa Valley is waiting downstairs, Margaret Davis announced from the doorway, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had made her invaluable over the past 2 years. Liam turned, taking in her professional appearance, a tailored navy blazer and pencil skirt that spoke of ambition rather than attention-seeking. The timing works better, he nodded, reaching for his Italian leather briefcase. The vineyard acquisition needs my full attention. Margaret fell into step beside him as they walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble in perfect rhythm. At 30, she carried herself with a grace that belied her humble beginnings, something Liam had noticed but never acknowledged aloud. "I've prepared the portfolio for the Vintage Creek negotiations," she said, handing him a leather-bound folder, "including the environmental impact reports you requested." Their fingers brushed momentarily during the exchange, a fleeting contact that neither acknowledged. Such moments had become more frequent lately, each one carrying a weight that threatened the carefully constructed walls of their professional relationship. Inside the elevator, Liam caught her reflection in the polished doors, the way she tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, a gesture he'd witnessed countless times but suddenly found distracting. "You've done exceptional work on this deal, Margaret," he said, breaking his own rule about personal compliments. A slight flush colored her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Kane." The drive to Napa Valley stretched before them like a blank canvas. Liam reviewed documents while Margaret coordinated with the vineyard owners, their practiced routine a dance of efficiency. As San Francisco's skyline faded behind them, the familiar tension of the office began to dissolve, replaced by something more dangerous: comfort. The Vintage Creek estate emerged from the rolling hills like a photograph from a luxury magazine. Mediterranean architecture blended with modern elements, while neat rows of grapevines stretched toward the horizon. The owner, Carlton Reed, greeted them at the entrance, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Liam Kane himself," Carlton extended his hand. "And this must be the famous Margaret I've heard so much about from your office. They tell me nothing gets done at Kane Industries without your approval." Margaret's subtle surprise at the recognition didn't escape Liam's notice. How many times had he taken credit for her insights, her strategies? The thought made him uncomfortable, a feeling he wasn't accustomed to entertaining. The tour of the vineyard proceeded smoothly, with Margaret documenting key points and occasionally interjecting with precisely timed questions that revealed her thorough understanding of the industry. As the afternoon sun began to set, Carlton suggested they sample some of the estate's finest wines in the private tasting room. "To new beginnings," Carlton raised his glass, the ruby liquid catching the light. "And to breaking the rules sometimes." Liam watched as Margaret took a small sip, noticed how the fading sunlight painted gold highlights in her hair. She caught his gaze, held it for a moment too long, and something shifted in the carefully controlled atmosphere between them. Later, as they toured the historic wine cellar, Carlton was called away for an urgent phone call. Alone among the oak barrels and bottles that chronicled decades of tradition, Liam found himself standing too close to Margaret as she examined a vintage label. "This one's from the year I was born," she mused, her voice softer than usual. When she turned, they were inches apart, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. "Margaret," he breathed, his carefully constructed rules crumbling like ancient stone. She looked up at him, and for the first time he allowed himself to see not his assistant, but a woman who had quietly become essential to more than just his business. The kiss, when it happened, felt both inevitable and shocking, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something that shattered every boundary they had ever established. When they broke apart, the reality of what they'd done crashed over them like a wave. Margaret stepped back, her professional mask slipping back into place even as her lips trembled. Liam straightened his tie, a futile attempt to restore order to a world suddenly turned chaos. "Mr. Kane, she began, but footsteps echoing on the stone floor announced Carlton's return. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of signatures and handshakes, of careful distances maintained and glances avoided. But as they drove back to San Francisco in silence, Liam Kane knew with devastating clarity that all his rules, all his control, had been undone by a single kiss in a wine cellar. And somewhere beneath the panic and the guilt, a part of him he'd long denied was finally awake, wondering what other rules were meant to be broken. The morning after Napa Valley dawned, grey and misty over San Francisco, matching the fog in Margaret's mind as she stood in her modest apartment's bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her fingers traced her lips unconsciously, remembering the pressure of Liam's kiss before she caught herself and dropped her hand as if burned. "It was a mistake," she whispered to her reflection, adjusting her cream silk blouse for the third time. A moment of weakness that won't happen again." But even as she spoke the words, the memory of oak barrels and vintage wine, of Liam's cologne and the warmth of his body against hers, threatened to overwhelm her professional resolve. Across town, in his penthouse overlooking the bay, Liam Kane was already on his second cup of coffee, having barely slept. His usual morning routine of reviewing market reports and emails had been interrupted repeatedly by flashbacks of auburn hair and soft lips, of the small gasp Margaret had made when he'd pulled her close. His phone buzzed, a message from Nathan Cole requesting an urgent meeting. Liam's jaw tightened. His rival's timing was never coincidental, but he couldn't afford to show weakness, especially now. He typed a brief response, scheduling the meeting for later that afternoon. The elevator ride to the executive floor had never felt longer. When the doors opened, Margaret was already at her desk, her posture perfect, her expression professionally neutral. Only the slight tremor in her hands as she handed him his morning briefing betrayed any hint of disturbance. "Good morning, Mr. Kane," she said, her voice steady. "Oh, the acquisition papers from Vintage Creek are being processed by legal, and I've arranged the conference calls you requested." Liam accepted the papers, careful to avoid any contact with her fingers. "Thank you, Margaret. Join me in my office to review the week's schedule." The glass doors closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo in the charged atmosphere. Margaret took her usual seat across from his desk, tablet ready, but neither spoke for a long moment. "About yesterday," they both began simultaneously, then stopped. Liam ran a hand through his silver-streaked dark hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "Margaret, what happened at the vineyard? I take full responsibility. It was inappropriate of me to—" "It was mutual," she interrupted, then caught herself. "I mean, we both—" "It doesn't have to change anything, Mr. Kane." The return to formality stung more than he expected. "Liam," he said softly, "after everything, at least when we're alone." A knock on the door made them both jump. Linda from HR entered with a stack of papers, oblivious to the tension she'd interrupted. As she discussed benefit packages and quarterly reviews, Liam watched Margaret from the corner of his eye, the way she took notes with practiced efficiency, the slight pulse visible at her throat, the new awareness between them that made every movement feel significant. The morning melted into afternoon, filled with meetings and calls that should have commanded Liam's full attention. Instead, he found himself hyper-aware of Margaret's presence, the scent of her perfume when she leaned over to point out details in presentations, the brush of her arm against his as she handed him documents, the way other executives looked straight through her, as if she were invisible. During a brief break between meetings, Margaret slipped into his office with fresh coffee, a daily ritual that suddenly felt intimate. "Nathan Cole's office called again," she said. "He's insisting on moving the meeting earlier." Liam's fingers tightened around his pen. "He can wait. I have more pressing matters to attend to." Like figuring out why he couldn't stop thinking about kissing his assistant again, despite every rule and regulation against it. "Of course." Margaret turned to leave, then hesitated. "Liam," she said quietly, testing his name on her tongue. "We should talk. Really talk. About what this means." Before he could respond, his private line rang, Carlton Reed from Vintage Creek. Margaret slipped out as he answered, but her words hung in the air between them. The afternoon brought fresh complications. Rachel Porter's name appeared on his caller ID twice. His ex-girlfriend's sudden interest in reconnecting couldn't be coincidental. During a budget meeting, Liam noticed one of the board members watching Margaret with unusual intensity as she presented the quarterly projections, and something possessive stirred in his chest. By evening, when most of the office had cleared out, the weight of unspoken words had become unbearable. Margaret stood in his doorway, silhouetted against the city lights, holding a final stack of papers requiring his signature. "Stay," he said suddenly, surprising them both. Please, we need to discuss this." She closed the door and settled into the leather chair across from him, her composure cracking slightly. "I've spent all day trying to pretend nothing's changed," she admitted. "But everything has, hasn't it?" Liam stood, moving to the window where the city spread out below them, lights twinkling like fallen stars. "I've built my life on control, on never letting emotion interfere with business. One moment with you, and all of that." He turned to face her. "I don't know how to do this, Margaret." "Neither do I," she whispered. "I've worked too hard to be taken seriously in this world. If people found out, I'd just be the assistant who slept her way to the top, even though nothing's even happened beyond the kiss," he finished, the word hanging between them like a live wire. Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "Maybe we should take some time, step back, think clearly about the consequences." But as she moved to leave, Liam caught her wrist gently. The contact sent electricity through both of them. "And if I don't want to think clearly anymore?" Her breath caught, and for a moment they stood frozen in the dimness of his office, the city lights painting shadows across their faces. Then Margaret carefully extracted her wrist from his grip. "Good night, Mr. Kane," she said softly, but her eyes told a different story as she walked away, leaving Liam alone with the knowledge that control, once lost, might be impossible to regain. Nathan Cole's corner office at Cole Enterprises offered a direct view of Kane Industries' headquarters, a fact he enjoyed reminding people of during meetings. He stood at the window now, rolling a crystal tumbler of bourbon between his palms as he watched the early morning light strike the rival building's glass facade. "Tell me more about what you observed at the vineyard," he said to the man seated across from his desk. Carlton Reed's assistant shifted uncomfortably in his chair, conscience warring with the substantial deposit that had appeared in his account that morning. "Mr. Kane and his assistant were alone in the wine cellar for several minutes," the man said finally. "When Mr. Reed returned, there was tension, the kind that speaks volumes." Nathan's thin lips curved into a predatory smile. "Interesting. The untouchable Liam Kane finally showing a weakness." Across the city, unaware of these machinations, Margaret tried to focus on the quarterly reports scattered across her desk. But her concentration kept drifting to the closed door of Liam's office, where he was on a video call with the London office. Even through the glass walls, she could see the authority in his bearing, the confidence that had first drawn her to him professionally, and now her phone buzzed, a text from her best friend Charlotte. "Lunch today? You've been avoiding me all week." Margaret sighed, knowing she couldn't put off the conversation forever. Charlotte had an uncanny ability to read her, and right now Margaret felt like every emotion was written across her face. The sound of Liam's door opening made her look up. He emerged with his suit jacket draped over one arm, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "The London meeting ran long," he said, stopping at her desk. "We'll need to push everything back an hour." "I'll reschedule the afternoon appointments," she replied, proud of how steady her voice remained despite the way her pulse quickened when he leaned closer to look at her screen. "Except Nathan Cole," Liam added, his tone hardening. "Keep that one. It's time to find out what he's playing at." The elevator dinged, and Rebecca from marketing stepped out, her eyes widening slightly at their proximity. Margaret quickly leaned back in her chair as Rebecca hurried past, but not before catching the speculative look in the other woman's eyes. "You should step back, Mr. Kane," Margaret said quietly. "People are starting to notice." His expression remained neutral, but his eyes darkened. "Have lunch with me," he said, pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Off-site. We need to discuss the Cole situation anyway." The professional excuse was paper-thin, and they both knew it. Margaret should have said no. Instead, she found herself texting Charlotte to reschedule. They chose a small French bistro in North Beach, far enough from the financial district to avoid running into colleagues. The intimate setting only heightened the tension between them as they sat in a corner booth, ostensibly reviewing documents. "Nathan's been asking questions about the Vintage Creek acquisition," Liam said, but his eyes kept drifting to Margaret's hands as she took notes. "He's never shown interest in the wine industry before." "He was there that day," Margaret revealed, causing Liam to look up sharply. "In the parking lot as we were leaving. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but what exactly did he see?" Liam's voice was taut with concern. "Nothing," she assured him. "We were completely professional by then." The blush that colored her cheeks at the memory betrayed her thoughts of what had been decidedly unprofessional earlier. Their food arrived, and they fell into a comfortable discussion of work matters. But undercurrents of attraction charged every glance, every accidental touch. Margaret found herself watching the way Liam's hands moved as he spoke, remembering how they had felt on her waist in the wine cellar. "And you're not listening to a word I'm saying," he observed, amusement and heat mixing in his voice. "I'm sorry. I was thinking about—" She broke off as their waiter approached with fresh water, too flustered to maintain her usual composure. "About?" Liam prompted when they were alone again, his voice dropping to that intimate register that made her shiver. Before she could respond, a familiar figure appeared at the restaurant's entrance. Nathan Cole stood scanning the room, his sharp features settling into a satisfied smirk when he spotted them. "Well, well," he said, approaching their table with calculated casualness. "Liam Kane, taking a long lunch with his assistant. How progressive of you." Margaret felt Liam tense beside her, saw his jaw clench as he met Nathan's gaze. "Nathan, our meeting isn't for another 3 hours. Just getting a bite myself," Nathan replied, his eyes sliding to Margaret with unsettling intensity. "Although I must say, the company here looks, delicious." Liam's hand tightened on his water glass. "If you have something to say, Nathan, say it." "Oh, I have plenty to say," Nathan smiled, reaching into his jacket to withdraw an envelope. "But perhaps we should discuss it privately. Unless you want your lovely assistant to hear all the details of what my sources have shared about your private moments." Margaret's blood ran cold as Nathan placed the envelope on their table. Through the fine paper, she could make out the shape of photographs. 3 o'clock, Liam," Nathan said smoothly. "Don't be late." He nodded to Margaret with exaggerated courtesy. "Always a pleasure, Ms. Davis. You know, if you ever feel like working for someone who can offer you a more public appreciation of your talents, my door is always open." The threat in his words was clear. As Nathan sauntered away, Margaret reached for the envelope with trembling fingers, but Liam caught her hand. "Don't," he said quietly. "Udi, whatever he has, we'll deal with it together." Their fingers remained entwined on the table for a moment too long, and Margaret realized with sudden clarity that they were already far past the point of no return. The game Nathan Cole wanted to play was dangerous, but the real danger lay in the way her heart raced at Liam's touch, in the knowledge that she would risk everything, her reputation, her career, her carefully built life, for more moments like this. Together, she repeated softly, and saw in Liam's eyes the same recognition, the same terrifying certainty that some things were worth burning for. The afternoon stretched like a rubber band ready to snap as Margaret watched the clock inch toward 3. She'd relocated to her small private office, a recent promotion she'd earned through years of dedication, but the walls felt more like a prison than a symbol of achievement. Through the glass partition, she could see Liam in his office, the envelope from Nathan lying unopened on his desk like a live grenade. Her computer pinged with an incoming email from HR, quarterly performance reviews, management track candidates. She'd been working toward this opportunity for months, taking night classes in business administration, volunteering for extra projects. Now, staring at the email, she felt her carefully planned future blurring at the edges. The elevator doors opened, and Nathan Cole strode onto the floor like he owned it. His tailored charcoal suit and blood-red tie screamed predator, and heads turned as he passed. His assistant, a nervous young man clutching a leather portfolio, hurried to keep up. "Mr. Cole?" Margaret stood, professional mask firmly in place. "Mr. Kane is expecting you." Nathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Margaret, that blouse is particularly becoming today. Italian silk, isn't it? Must be nice having such generous employers." The insinuation made her stomach turn, but she kept her expression neutral as she showed him into Liam's office. As she turned to leave, Nathan caught her arm. "Stay," he said. "What I have to discuss concerns you too, after all." Liam rose from behind his desk, his voice sharp. "Take your hand off my assistant, Nathan." The moment crackled with tension until Nathan released her, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Just being friendly. Isn't that what you're all about these days, Liam? Breaking down workplace barriers." Margaret moved to the corner of the office, neither fully present nor dismissed, as Nathan settled into one of the leather chairs facing Liam's desk. "What do you want?" Liam's voice was cold enough to freeze hell. Nathan reached for the envelope, opening it with theatrical slowness. "Beautiful place, vintage creek. The light in the wine cellar is particularly romantic." He spread several photographs across the desk. "Though these security camera shots are a bit grainy, the passion comes through quite clearly." Margaret's hands clenched behind her back as she glimpsed the images, her and Liam in the wine cellar, the kiss captured from multiple angles. Each photo was time-stamped, documenting their moment of weakness in damning detail. "If you're attempting blackmail, you're wasting both our time," Liam said, but Margaret caught the slight tension in his jaw. "Blackmail? No, no." Nathan leaned back, adjusting his cufflinks. "Think of this as a business opportunity. The board might be interested to know their CEO is compromised, making decisions based on personal attachments. The Vintage Creek acquisition, for instance. Was it really the best use of company resources, or were you just looking for a romantic getaway?" "The acquisition was my recommendation," Margaret spoke up, her voice stronger than she felt, "based on months of market research and financial projections." "Ah, yes, your famous attention to detail." Nathan's smile turned cruel. "Tell me, did you plan the kiss as carefully as you planned the purchase? Was seducing the boss part of your career strategy all along?" Liam's hands slammed onto his desk as he stood. "That's enough." "No, I don't think it is." Nathan stood as well, matching Liam's stance. "Here's my offer. Step down as CEO. Recommend me as your replacement, and these photos disappear. Refuse, and tomorrow morning every board member receives copies, along with a detailed report of your inappropriate relationship." "You're delusional," Liam growled. "Am I? The board is already nervous about the direction you're taking the company. Too much focus on sustainability, on worker benefits." Nathan glanced at Margaret. "On promoting from within, they're looking for an excuse to make changes. I'm offering you a chance to leave with your dignity intact." Margaret stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Those photos prove nothing except that Mr. Kane and I shared one unprofessional moment. It's hardly grounds for removal." One moment caught on camera, Nathan corrected, but my sources tell me there have been others. Private lunches, lingering glances, late nights alone in the office. The rumors are already spreading. How long before someone files a formal complaint? Liam's expression hardened. Get out. You have until tomorrow morning. Nathan gathered the photos, leaving one behind. Consider it carefully. Your reputation, your legacy, her future, all hanging in the balance. He paused at the door. Oh, and Margaret, my offer stands. When this all falls apart, you'll need somewhere to land. The door closed behind him, leaving a silence heavy with unspoken words. Margaret moved to the window, watching the fog roll in from the bay, obscuring the city below. I'll resign, she said quietly. It's the simplest solution. No! Liam's voice was firm as he moved to stand behind her. I won't let him win like that. Then what's your plan? She turned to face him, close enough to see the storm in his eyes. Because he's right. The rumors are spreading. This morning in the break room, I heard whispers stop when I walked in. Rebecca from marketing has been watching us like a hawk. It's only a matter of time. Liam reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. I built this company on integrity, on doing what's right, even when it's hard. I won't let Nathan Cole turn that into something dirty. And us. Margaret's voice wavered. What are we doing, Liam? Playing with fire and pretending we won't get burned. Instead of answering, he kissed her. Unlike their first kiss in the wine cellar, this one was deliberate, a conscious choice, rather than a moment of weakness. His hands cradled her face as if she were precious, breakable, even as his lips claimed hers with an intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. When they broke apart, reality crashed back in. They were standing in his glass-walled office, silhouetted against the fog-shrouded city. Anyone could have seen. I should go, Margaret whispered, stepping back. I have that HR meeting about the management track. Margaret? Liam's voice stopped her at the door. Whatever Nathan throws at us, we'll handle it. Together. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and fled to her office. Only when she was alone did she allow herself to touch her lips, still tingling from his kiss. On her computer screen, the HR email still waited for a response, a reminder of everything she'd worked for, everything she stood to lose. In his office, Liam picked up the photograph Nathan had left behind. It showed the exact moment he'd fallen in love with his assistant, captured in grainy black and white. He should have felt trapped, threatened. Instead, looking at the way Margaret's hands had clutched his lapels, the vulnerable tilt of her neck as she'd surrendered to the kiss, he felt something dangerous unfurling in his chest, something that felt remarkably like hope. Rachel Porter's heels echoed through the marble lobby of Kane Industries like warning shots. At 40, she wore her beauty like armor, every detail calculated for maximum impact, from her perfectly styled blonde hair to the red-soled Louboutins that had become her signature. The security guard barely glanced at her visitor's badge. She'd been a frequent visitor during her year-long relationship with Liam Kane. That had been 2 years ago, before he'd thrown himself into work, before he'd started spouting nonsense about corporate responsibility over profits, before Margaret Davis. The thought of Liam's assistant made Rachel's perfectly painted lips curve into a cold smile. Nathan's call had been illuminating and perfectly timed. She'd been looking for a way back into Liam's life, and now opportunity had knocked. Margaret was reviewing the morning's crisis reports when a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up to find Rachel Porter studying her with the kind of smile that made her want to check for blood. "Margaret, isn't it?" Rachel's voice dripped honey-coated poison. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Rachel Porter." "Of course, Ms. Porter." Margaret stood, professional mask firmly in place. "Mr. Kane is in a meeting at the moment." "Oh, I know." Rachel settled elegantly into one of the visitor chairs. "I came to talk to you, actually. Woman to woman." Warning bells rang in Margaret's head. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. "This won't take long." Rachel extracted a small velvet box from her designer bag. "I just thought you should see this." Inside the box nestled a stunning diamond ring. Margaret's heart stuttered. "Liam gave this to me last Christmas," Rachel said softly. "He's not good with endings, you see. He lets things drift, lets people believe what they want to believe. I thought you should know, before you risk everything for what's likely just another of his temporary distractions." Margaret's voice remained steady through sheer force of will. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but my relationship with Mr. Kane is strictly professional." Rachel's laugh was like breaking glass. "Darling, nothing about the way he looks at you is professional. I should know. He used to look at me the same way." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Just remember, when the scandal breaks, you'll be the disposable one, the pretty assistant who misread her boss's intentions. Your career will never recover." She placed the ring box on Margaret's desk, like a landmine. "Something to think about." Margaret waited until Rachel's footsteps faded before sinking into her chair, her hands trembling. The ring caught the morning light, throwing rainbows across her desk, beautiful and deadly as Rachel's warning. Her phone buzzed, a text from Charlotte. "Lunch, no more excuses." Attached was a photo from their college days, both of them laughing, full of dreams and determination. Margaret stared at her younger self, wondering when life had become so complicated. "Everything all right?" She startled at Liam's voice. He stood in his office doorway, concern etched on his features. The sight of him made her heart ache. How had she let herself fall so far? "Rachel Porter paid me a visit," she said quietly, watching his expression darken. "She brought you something." Liam crossed to her desk, his face hardening at the sight of the ring. "Margaret, don't!" She held up a hand. "I need to focus on the Phillips merger documentation, and you have the board meeting in 20 minutes. He reached for the ring box, his fingers brushing hers. "Let me explain. Mr. Kane." Rebecca from marketing approached with a stack of reports, her eyes darting between them with poorly concealed interest. "Do you have a moment?" Margaret pulled her hand back as if burned. "The Phillips files will be on your desk within the hour," she said formally, standing. "If you'll excuse me, I have a lunch appointment." She grabbed her bag and fled, feeling Liam's eyes on her back. In the elevator, she pressed the lobby button with more force than necessary, trying to hold back tears. Charlotte was waiting at their usual cafe, 2 glasses of wine already ordered. One look at Margaret's face, and she knew something was wrong. "Spill," she demanded. "What's going on with you?" Margaret took a long sip of wine. "I've done something stupid, Charlie. Really, really stupid. Does this have something to do with your impossibly handsome boss?" "Is it that obvious?" Charlotte's expression softened. "Only to someone who's known you forever. You get this look when you talk about him, like you're terrified and thrilled at the same time." "It doesn't matter." Margaret twisted her napkin. "It was a mistake, one that could cost me everything I've worked for." "What happened?" Before Margaret could answer, her phone chimed with an email alert. Her heart stopped when she saw the sender, Nathan Cole. The subject line read simply, "A friendly warning." Attached was a photo, not from the wine cellar, but from Liam's office that morning, their hands touching over the ring box, the intimacy of their stance undeniable. The message below was brief. "Tomorrow's board meeting should be interesting. Last chance to consider my offer." "Maggie?" Charlotte's voice seemed far away. "You've gone pale. I have to go." Margaret grabbed her bag. "I'm sorry. I'll explain everything later." She half ran back to the office, her mind racing. The security desk stopped her. There was a delivery, a large bouquet of red roses, no card. She knew who they were from. Upstairs, she found Liam waiting in her office. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "No, we need to stop." She thrust her phone at him, showing Nathan's email. "This has gone too far. Rachel's right. I'll be the one who loses everything when this explodes. Rachel doesn't know anything about us." He stepped closer. "Margaret, what I felt for her was nothing compared to—" "Don't," her voice cracked. "Please don't make this harder. I've worked too hard to be taken seriously in this world. I won't be remembered as the assistant who fell for her boss. Is that all this is to you? A cliché?" The pain in his voice nearly broke her. Of course not, but sometimes. She gestured at the roses, the ring box still sitting on her desk like an accusation. Sometimes love isn't enough. She turned away, missing the devastation that crossed his face. The Phillips merger files are complete. I'll have them sent to the board before tomorrow's meeting, and she took a deep breath. I think you should accept my resignation. No. The word was sharp, definitive. I won't let you throw away your career because of Nathan's threats or Rachel's manipulation. It's not your choice to make. The hell it isn't. He caught her arm, turning her to face him. I love you. The words hung between them, impossible to take back. Margaret stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Before she could respond, his office door opened. Mr. Kane. His secretary looked apologetic. The board members are gathering early. They're asking for you. And, she hesitated, Mr. Cole is with them. The moment shattered. Liam's hand fell from Margaret's arm, but his eyes held hers, pleading silently. Go, she whispered. They're waiting. She watched him walk away, his shoulders set with determination. Only when he was gone did she allow herself to sink into her chair, touching her lips to hold back a sob. On her desk, the roses filled the air with their sweet scent, and the diamond ring caught the light like a tear. The Kane Industries boardroom stretched before Liam like a battlefield. 12 faces regarded him with varying degrees of concern and curiosity as he took his place at the head of the mahogany table. Nathan Cole had positioned himself strategically at the opposite end, his tablet displaying what Liam suspected were the damning photographs. William Brunswick, the eldest board member and Liam's longtime mentor, spoke first. Liam, we've called this emergency session due to some concerning allegations brought to our attention. By Mr. Cole, no doubt. Liam's voice remained steady as he surveyed the room. These people had trusted him for years, followed his vision as he transformed Kane Industries from a profit-driven machine into a company with conscience. Among others, Patricia Chen, head of the audit committee, interjected. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. There are questions about the Vintage Creek acquisition. The timing, the valuation, all of which is documented in detail. A clear voice cut through the tension. Margaret stood in the doorway, her arms full of folders. I apologize for interrupting, but I believe these files are relevant to the discussion. Nathan's smirk faltered slightly as Margaret distributed the documents with professional efficiency. Liam noticed she'd changed into her Navy power suit, armor for battle. These are the complete financial projections for Vintage Creek, she explained, her voice gaining strength, including market analysis, environmental impact studies, and projected ROI based on our Sustainable Agriculture Initiative. You'll find my initial recommendation dated 3 months before the acquisition, with Mr. Kane's preliminary rejection on page 4. William Brunswick adjusted his glasses, frowning at the papers. And rejection? I had concerns about the timing, Liam confirmed, catching Margaret's eye briefly. Ms. Davis convinced me otherwise with compelling data about market trends and potential synergies. How convenient, Nathan drawled, tapping his tablet. Speaking of synergies, I have some interesting security footage from cameras you arranged to have installed without authorization. Margaret's question landed like a bomb in the quiet room. I took the liberty of contacting Carlton Reed this morning. He was quite surprised to learn about surveillance equipment in his wine cellar, especially given that the only cameras on the property are in the main tasting room. Colour drained from Nathan's face as Margaret continued, her voice clinical. Mr. Reed was particularly interested in the recent attempts to access his private business records. The FBI's cybercrime division is now involved. Patricia Chen leaned forward. Mr. Cole, is this true? The photographs, Nathan began, are doctored, Margaret interrupted, placing another folder on the table. As confirmed by 3 independent digital forensics experts, their reports are included. Liam watched with carefully concealed pride as she systematically dismantled Nathan's accusations. She'd been busy since their conversation in her office, turning her pain into purpose. While we're discussing ethical concerns, Margaret continued, her composure absolute, The board might be interested in these. She produced a final set of documents, records of Mr. Cole's recent stock transactions through shell companies, coordinated with strategic leaks of confidential information. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Nathan shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You can't prove anything. The SEC is already investigating," Margaret stated calmly. "They're particularly interested in the pattern of harassment and attempted blackmail against Mr. Kane." William Brunswick's voice cut through the noise. "Nathan, I think it's best if you leave. Security will escort you out." As Nathan was led away, still protesting, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Patricia Chen cleared her throat. "While Miss Davis's revelations about Mr. Cole are disturbing, they don't address the rumors about my relationship with Mr. Kane." Margaret's voice wavered slightly for the first time. "I've prepared my resignation letter. My only request is that these events don't overshadow the merits of the Vintage Creek acquisition or the company's commitment to sustainable business practices." "No." Liam stood, unable to stay silent any longer. "I won't accept your resignation." "Liam," William warned softly. "No," he repeated firmly. "Margaret Davis is the most talented executive this company has. She started in the mailroom 7 years ago and worked her way up through sheer brilliance and determination. Yes, there was one moment of unprofessional conduct between us at Vintage Creek, a moment I initiated, and one I don't regret." The board members shifted uncomfortably as he continued. "If you want my resignation, you can have it. But I won't let this company lose an exceptional leader because of my actions." Margaret stared at him, her professional mask cracking. "Liam, don't." "I love her." The words echoed in the silent room. "And if that makes me unfit to lead this company, so be it. But everything she's shown you today, the strategic thinking, the attention to detail, the absolute integrity, that's who Margaret Davis is. That's what this company needs." William Brunswick removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. "Patricia, your audit committee has reviewed the Vintage Creek documentation?" "Extensively," she nodded. "The acquisition is sound. Actually, given recent market movements, it's proving more valuable than initially projected. And the other allegations, the photographs, appear to be fabricated, as Ms. Davis demonstrated." William surveyed the room. "I move that we dismiss all charges against Liam Kane and Margaret Davis, effective immediately. Further, I recommend we promote Miss Davis to Director of Strategic Initiatives, reporting directly to the board to avoid any appearance of impropriety." "Seconded," Patricia said firmly. The vote was unanimous. As the board members filed out, William paused beside Liam. "Love makes fools of us all, my boy," he said quietly. "But sometimes the heart sees what the mind misses. Don't waste this second chance." Alone in the boardroom, Liam and Margaret stood in charged silence. She spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have done that. Risked everything like that. You shouldn't have spent all night building a case to save my company while planning to resign." He stepped closer. "Or we're quite a pair of stubborn fools. I couldn't let him destroy you." Her composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks, even if it meant walking away. Liam gently wiped away her tears. "I meant what I said, all of it. I know." She leaned into his touch. "I love you too, you impossible man." Their kiss was gentle, healing, a beginning rather than an ending. When they broke apart, Margaret laughed softly. "Oh, Director of Strategic Initiatives, you earned it, though I'll miss having you right outside my office." "Mr. Kane," she smiled, straightening his tie, "I have a feeling you'll be seeing plenty of me." As they left the boardroom together, the late afternoon sun painted the city gold, a new day dawning in more ways than one. The morning headlines hit like aftershocks. Kane Industries CEO declares love in boardroom showdown. Corporate romance rocks financial district. Nathan Cole under SEC investigation. Margaret's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Childhood friends and distant relatives suddenly remembering her existence. She stood in her new office, a corner space on the executive floor, watching movers arrange her furniture. The promotion had come with all the trappings of corporate success: Brazilian hardwood desk, Italian leather chairs, and a view of the bay that made her previous workspace feel like a closet. Yet something felt hollow about it all. Ms. Davis, her new assistant, Andrea, hovered in the doorway. Reception called. "Rachel Porter is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." Margaret squared her shoulders. "And you send her up." Rachel arrived like a storm front, designer heels clicking against marble floors. "Quite the coup," she said, surveying Margaret's new office, "though I suppose sleeping with the CEO has its perks. I earned this office by exposing corporate espionage and saving the company millions." Margaret's voice was steel. "But you wouldn't know anything about earning your way, would you, Rachel?" Rachel's perfect smile faltered. "You think you've won? That Liam will respect you now that you're his dirty little secret made public? I'm not the one who kept an engagement ring as emotional leverage." Margaret moved behind her desk, a power play she'd learned from watching Liam. Was that before or after he ended things? He never officially ended anything. Rachel's composure cracked slightly. "He just drifted away. That's what he does, Margaret. He gets distracted by shiny new toys until they lose their luster." A knock interrupted them. Liam stood in the doorway, his expression darkening at the sight of Rachel. "Everything all right here?" "Perfect timing," Rachel purred. "I was just warning your latest conquest about your attention span." She turned to Margaret. "Ask him about the cabin in Tahoe, about the promises he made there." Margaret saw Liam flinch almost imperceptibly. "Rachel," he said quietly, "enough." "You're right, it is enough." Rachel gathered her bag. "Enjoy your victory lap, Margaret. Just remember, he promised me forever too." After she left, silence filled the office like smoke. Margaret busied herself arranging files, avoiding Liam's gaze. "The cabin was a mistake," he said finally. "And I was trying to convince myself I could be someone I'm not." "And what kind of someone is that?" "The kind who settles for safe instead of real." He moved closer, but stopped short of touching her. Rachel was the safe choice. Socially acceptable, professionally advantageous, but with you, with me, you risk everything. Margaret finally met his eyes. "Your reputation, your company's stability. With you, I feel alive." His hand found hers across the desk. "The board meeting yesterday, watching you dismantle Nathan's schemes, seeing your brilliant mind at work, that's when I knew I'd never been in love before you." Before she could respond, Andrea appeared with an urgent message. The business press was requesting interviews, wanting the inside story of corporate romance and redemption. "Vultures," Liam muttered. "We don't owe them." "Actually," Margaret interrupted, an idea forming, "maybe we do. On our terms." She outlined her plan. A single exclusive interview with a respected financial journal, focusing on the corporate espionage angle and their professional achievements. "We control the narrative," she explained. "Instead of a scandal, it becomes a story about integrity and innovation." Liam's slow smile was proud. "This is why you're now Director of Strategic Initiatives. Speaking of which," she withdrew her hand reluctantly, "we need to establish boundaries. Professional hours, professional behavior." "Agreed." He stepped back, adjusting his tie. "Dinner tonight, to discuss strategy, of course." "Of course." Her smile held promises. "Now go. I have a company to help run." The day unfolded in a blur of meetings and congratulatory messages. Margaret's inbox filled with partnership proposals and speaking invitations. Everyone wanted to hear from the woman who'd outmaneuvered Nathan Cole. During a brief lunch break, she called Charlotte, who'd left 14 increasingly excited voicemails. "You confronted a corporate raider, got promoted, and kept the hot CEO." Charlotte squealed. "This is better than those romance novels you pretend not to read." "It's more complicated than that," Margaret sighed. "The publicity, Rachel's threats, the office politics." "Stop!" Charlotte's voice turned serious. "I've known you since college, Maggie. You've spent years being the perfect professional, hiding your light so others wouldn't feel threatened. Maybe it's time to let yourself shine." After hanging up, Margaret stood at her office window, watching the fog roll in. Below, a news van waited at the curb, hoping for a soundbite. Her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Missing you, professional enough." She smiled despite herself, typing back, "Borderline inappropriate, Mr. Kane." His response came quickly. "Worth it, like everything about you." A knock interrupted her reply. Patricia Chen stood in the doorway, audit reports in hand. "Got a minute? We should discuss the quarterly projections." Margaret straightened, game face on. "Of course, I've been reviewing the Sustainable Energy Initiative." The afternoon passed in a whirlwind of actual work. Budgets, strategies, the 1,000 details that kept Kane Industries running. Margaret found herself thriving. Her ideas met with respect rather than resistance. If some executives eyed her with suspicion, others seemed relieved to finally acknowledge her contributions. As sunset painted her new office gold, she found herself alone with her thoughts. Rachel's words echoed uncomfortably. "He promised me forever too." On her desk, a framed photo caught her eye, her college graduation, standing proud with her business degree, dreams untainted by doubt. Her phone buzzed again. "Liam, cars waiting downstairs, ready to strategize over dinner." Margaret touched the photo, remembering that younger self's determination. She'd fought too hard to let fear win now. "Ready?" she texted back. "But I'm driving. Time to make some new rules." She gathered her things, head high as she walked through the office. Let them watch, let them whisper. She'd earned her place here, not just in Liam's heart, but in the company's future. The elevator doors opened, and there he stood, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever had. "Miss Davis," he smiled, professional mask firmly in place despite the warmth in his eyes. "Mr. Kane," she matched his tone, stepping into the elevator. "Shall we discuss strategy?" As the doors closed, their fingers brushed, a touch that promised more once the workday ended. They had mountains yet to climb, but for now, this moment was enough. Two people who'd chosen love over safety, truth over appearance, and found strength in the choosing. The annual Kane Industries Charity Gala transformed the San Francisco Symphony Hall into a glittering wonderland of crystal and candlelight. Margaret stood before the full-length mirror in her apartment, barely recognizing herself in the emerald silk gown that Charlotte had insisted she buy. "You're not the invisible assistant anymore," her friend had reminded her. "Dress like the power player you are." Her phone lit up with a text from Liam. "Cars downstairs. Ready?" She touched the delicate diamond pendant he'd given her last night. "Not an engagement ring," he'd said with a knowing smile, "but a promise that we'll write our own story." The memory steadied her nerves as she grabbed her clutch and headed down. Liam waited beside the town car, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. His breath caught visibly when he saw her. "You look professional," she teased, remembering their ongoing joke about boundaries. "Breathtaking." He kissed her softly, then opened the car door. "And entirely unprofessional." The drive to Symphony Hall felt charged with anticipation. This would be their first official appearance as a couple, under the scrutiny of San Francisco's entire business community. The press would be there, society photographers, and Rachel confirmed her attendance. Liam said quietly, reading her mind, "With Carlton Reed as her date." Margaret's fingers tightened around her clutch. "Convenient timing." "Hey!" He covered her hand with his. "Whatever games she's playing, we face them together." Camera flashes erupted as they arrived. Reporters calling questions about their relationship, the company, Nathan Cole's ongoing investigation. Margaret felt Liam's hand steady at the small of her back as they navigated the gauntlet. Inside, conversations stuttered as they entered the grand foyer. Margaret recognized the polarized reactions, some guests nodding approval, others whispering behind raised hands. William Brunswick approached, champagne in hand. "The golden couple arrives," he smiled warmly. Margaret, that sustainable energy proposal you presented yesterday is brilliant. The board is impressed. Thank you, sir. William, a honeyed voice interrupted. You're hogging the guests of honor. Rachel Porter stood before them in red silk, Carlton Reed hovering awkwardly beside her. Her smile was razor-sharp. Margaret, that dress is lovely. Almost makes you look like you belong here. Rachel, Liam's voice held warning. Oh, don't worry, darling. I'm not here to make scenes. Rachel sipped her champagne. Though Carlton and I were just discussing the cabin. Remember that weekend, Liam? The promises made under starlight. Margaret felt Liam tense beside her. Carlton looked increasingly uncomfortable. If you'll excuse us, Margaret said smoothly, we should greet the other guests. As they moved away, she heard Rachel's carrying whisper. He had the cabin renovated for us, our perfect escape from the world. The evening became a blur of forced smiles and strategic conversations. Margaret threw herself into work discussions, impressing potential investors with her vision for Kane Industries' future. But Rachel's words festered, along with the memory of Liam's flinch when she'd mentioned the cabin. During a quiet moment, Margaret slipped away to the terrace, needing air. The city sparkled below, 1,000 lights reflecting her tumbled thoughts. I was going to propose to her there. She turned to find Liam in the doorway, his expression raw with honesty. The cabin, he continued, moving to join her at the railing. I thought if I created the perfect romantic setting, made all the right gestures, I could convince myself it was real love. What stopped you? I looked at the cabin, at all the carefully planned details, and realized I was staging a life instead of living one. He turned to face her. Rachel fit the image I thought I needed, the society wife, the perfect hostess. But with you, with me, it's messy, Margaret finished. Complicated. Your board members still watch me like I might steal the silver. With you, it's real. He caught her hand, his thumb tracing her palm. The cabin was about creating the appearance of love. You make me want to tear down appearances altogether, even if it costs you. Especially then. His smile turned wry. Though you're wrong about the board. They're watching you because you're brilliant and they know it. 3 members have already asked me if you'll consider joining the Sustainability Committee. Inside, the orchestra began playing. Through the terrace doors, they could see couples moving onto the dance floor. Ms. Davis, Liam offered his hand formally. Would you do me the honor? Here? She glanced at the empty terrace. Here? Where it's just us. No expectations, no audience. As they swayed together under the stars, Margaret rested her head on his shoulder. The cabin bothered me, she admitted. Not because you almost proposed there, but because it represented something I could never be. That perfect, polished world Rachel inhabits so naturally. I don't want perfect anymore. His arms tightened around her. I want real. I want morning coffee and late-night strategy sessions. I want brilliant ideas and challenging arguments. I want you. A throat cleared behind them. Andrea, Margaret's assistant, stood apologetically in the doorway. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the foundation director is ready for your speech, Mr. Kane. Reality beckoned. They separated reluctantly, straightening clothes and masks, ready to face the wolves. Liam offered his arm. Margaret took it, standing tall. Let them watch. We've nothing to hide. They re-entered the ballroom together, heads high. Rachel stood with Carlton near the stage, her perfect facade cracking slightly as she watched them. But Margaret barely noticed, too focused on the warmth of Liam's hand, covering hers, the quiet pride in his eyes as he took the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying clearly, tonight we celebrate not just charity, but change. The courage to choose authenticity over appearance, innovation over tradition. As he spoke about Kane Industries' commitment to progressive values, Margaret felt the weight of eyes upon her, but for the first time, she welcomed the attention. Let them see her, not as the assistant who'd caught the boss's eye, but as a woman who'd earned her place in both the boardroom and his heart. Later, as they swayed together on the main dance floor, surrounded by San Francisco's elite, Liam whispered in her ear, "Take me home." She pulled back slightly, surprised. The gala's not over. There are still people to impress, donors to charm. Let the foundation handle it. Tonight, I just want to be us. In the car, Margaret kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. And so much for our first public appearance. I'd say it was a success. Liam loosened his bow tie. You charmed the investors, impressed the board, and looked absolutely stunning doing it. And Rachel is living in a past I'm glad to leave behind. He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. The cabin's for sale, by the way. I listed it last week. Margaret squeezed his hand, understanding the gesture for what it was, not just letting go of the past, but making room for their future, whatever shape it might take. As the car wound through the city streets, she watched the lights blur past and thought about appearances versus reality. In the end, Rachel had given her an unexpected gift, the certainty that what she shared with Liam was real, built on shared dreams and mutual respect, rather than carefully staged perfection. "What are you thinking?" Liam asked softly. Margaret smiled, her head finding its place on his shoulder. That sometimes the messiest paths lead to the truest destinations." His answering kiss tasted of champagne and promises, not the kind made under starlight for show, but the kind proven in boardrooms and charity galas, in morning coffee and evening dances, in choosing reality over appearance every single day. The crisis hit on a quiet Tuesday morning. Margaret was reviewing sustainability reports when urgent news alerts flooded her phone. Major environmental violation at Kane's subsidiary. Toxic spill cover-up alleged. Kane Industries under investigation. She was already running toward Liam's office when William Brunswick burst in, tablet in hand. "It's bad," the board member announced grimly. "Pacific Northwest Operations reported falsified environmental data for the past year. EPA's involved." Liam's face hardened as he scanned the reports. "Get legal up here, now!" The next hours passed in a blur of emergency meetings and damage control. Their newly appointed PR team scrambled to address the media firestorm, while environmental experts assessed the actual damage. Margaret coordinated with regulatory agencies, her phone constantly buzzing with updates. "The data manipulation predates your sustainability initiative," she told Liam during a brief moment alone, "but the timing of this leak is suspicious," he finished. "Someone waited until we were vulnerable." As if on cue, his private line rang. "Rachel Porter." Liam put the call on speaker. "Such a shame." Rachel's voice dripped false sympathy. "All that talk about corporate responsibility, and now this. The board must be questioning their faith in your leadership." "What do you want, Rachel?" "Just calling as a concerned friend. Though I hear Nathan Cole's replacement at Cole Enterprises is looking for experienced executives, someone with traditional values, not distracted by personal entanglements." Margaret's hands clenched into fists as Rachel continued. "Carlton's been sharing interesting stories about Pacific Northwest operations. He seemed quite worried about their practices when we visited last month." After Rachel hung up, Margaret paced the office. "She's working with Carlton. They waited until the gala to confirm our relationship was solid, then struck where it would hurt most. Your reputation for integrity." "Our reputation," Liam corrected. "You're as much a part of this company now as I am." The words hung heavy between them. Margaret had spent weeks establishing herself as more than just the CEO's girlfriend, earning respect for her innovative strategies. Now this crisis threatened to undo everything. "We need to separate this," she said finally. "Professionally, I'm your Director of Strategic Initiatives, and we have a company to save. Personally," she met his eyes, "personally, we trust each other enough to handle both." Liam nodded, understanding. They spent the next 12 hours in crisis mode, their routine practiced from years of working together. Margaret coordinated with the environmental team while Liam handled investors. They moved in perfect sync, anticipating each other's needs without compromising their professional standards. Late that night, reviewing damage reports in the conference room, Margaret noticed something odd in the data patterns. "These numbers, they're too perfect. Like someone wanted them found." She dug deeper, cross-referencing dates and access logs. A pattern emerged, one that led straight to Carlton Reed's investment firm. He's been buying up shares through shell companies, she realized. Small amounts, staying under reporting requirements if our stock crashes. And he could grab control at a discount, Liam finished, and Rachel gets her revenge. Margaret was already pulling up more records. And the falsified data is real, but the timing, the selective leaks, they're trying to make it look worse than it is. We need to get ahead of this. They worked through the night, building their counter-strategy. By dawn, Margaret had compiled enough evidence to show the manipulation. Liam called an emergency board meeting. Before we begin, he addressed the gathered members, I want to acknowledge our failure in oversight. The environmental violations are real, though limited in scope, and we will take full responsibility for correcting them. Margaret stepped forward with her findings. However, we've uncovered evidence of market manipulation surrounding this crisis. Carlton Reed, working with Rachel Porter, orchestrated the timing of these leaks for maximum damage. She presented the stock analysis, the shell companies, the coordinated media attacks. They're counting on us to be distracted by our personal relationship, to miss the bigger picture. Which is exactly why having Ms. Davis in leadership is crucial, William Brunswick spoke up. Her distance from the emotional aspects of this situation allowed her to spot what we all missed. The board voted unanimously to implement Margaret's proposed solution: full transparency about the violations, immediate corrective action, and a comprehensive investigation into Carlton Reed's trading activities. Hours later, as the stock price began to stabilize, Margaret found Liam in his office, staring out at the fog-shrouded bay. The SEC is looking into Carlton's trades, she reported. Rachel's been officially banned from all Kane Industries properties. You saved us, he said quietly. Not just the company, but my faith in what we've built here. We saved us, she corrected. I couldn't have done it without the trust you've placed in me, both professionally and personally. He turned to face her, eyes tired but proud. When Rachel called, trying to divide us, and for a moment, I worried you'd question everything, wonder if loving me was worth the constant attacks. Margaret moved closer, straightening his tie out of habit. The attacks come because what we have is real, strong enough to threaten people who deal in appearances. Stay with me tonight, he asked softly, not as CEO and director, just as us. She smiled, touching his cheek. Always. But first, we have environmental reports to file, press releases to approve, and a company to rebuild. They worked late into the evening, maintaining their professional distance, despite the intimate understanding that had grown between them. When the last report was filed, the last email sent, they finally allowed themselves to be just Liam and Margaret, two people who had chosen each other, not despite the challenges, but because facing them together made them stronger. As they left the office, Margaret caught their reflection in the darkened windows. No longer the powerful CEO and his assistant, but partners in every sense of the word. They had faced down corporate raiders and personal demons, proving that true partnership, both in business and in love, meant supporting each other's strengths while protecting each other's vulnerabilities. The night air was cool as they walked to the car, the city lights reflecting off the bay like stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had won something more valuable than stock prices or board approval: the certainty that their love could survive any storm, professional or personal, as long as they faced it together. Margaret sat in her doctor's office, the words high risk and career implications floating around her like autumn leaves. The pregnancy test results lay in her lap, simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. 6 weeks. She'd been so focused on the company crisis, on proving herself in her new role, that she'd missed the early signs. Given your age and stress levels, Dr. Chen explained gently, you'll need to make some lifestyle changes. Your current workload isn't sustainable. Outside, San Francisco sparkled under rare, clear skies. The bay, a perfect blue mirror. Margaret's phone buzzed with meeting reminders. The Sustainability Committee at 2C, quarterly projections review at 4, dinner with Liam at 8. Their carefully balanced professional and personal lives suddenly seemed as fragile as spun glass. She hadn't told him yet. How could she? They just weathered the environmental crisis, rebuilt public trust in Kane Industries. The press had finally stopped running stories about their relationship, focusing instead on their corporate innovations. A baby would reignite every scandal, every whispered accusation about her sleeping her way to the top. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Miss Davis, Mr. Kane is asking if you'll join the board meeting. They're discussing the Asian expansion. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. Margaret gathered her composure like armor, tucking the test results into her desk drawer. She had time to figure this out, time to find the right moment. The board meeting passed in a blur of projected figures and market analyses. Margaret presented her research mechanically, hyper-aware of Liam's presence at the head of the table. He looked concerned. She'd been distant lately, making excuses to work late, avoiding their usual private moments. "Excellent work as always, Margaret." William Brunswick nodded as the meeting concluded. "Though you seemed a bit distracted." "Everything all right?" "Just tired." She forced a smile. "The crisis took a lot out of all of us." "Indeed." The elderly board member studied her thoughtfully. "You know, I've known Liam since he was a boy. Watched him build this company with the same determination his father showed, but I've never seen him as balanced, as truly happy, as he's been since you came into his life." Margaret's throat tightened. "William, whatever's troubling you," he patted her hand, "remember that true partnerships can weather any storm." She found herself walking to the old coffee shop, where she and Liam had shared countless working lunches when she was his assistant. The familiar scent of roasted beans and memories wrapped around her as she claimed their usual corner table. "I thought I'd find you here." Liam stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, looking more vulnerable than she'd seen him since the boardroom confession of love. "How did you know?" "Because I know you," he said simply, sliding into the seat across from her. "And just like I know something's been wrong for days." The barista brought their usual orders without being asked. Her chai latte, his black coffee. Some routines survived any transformation. "Talk to me, Margaret." Liam's voice was gentle. "Whatever it is, we face it together, remember?" She pulled the test results from her bag with trembling hands. "I'm pregnant." The words hung between them like crystal, catching the light from different angles. Liam's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Shock, joy, concern, fear. "How long have you known?" "Just this morning. The doctor says it's high risk. I'll need to reduce stress, maybe take a leave of absence." Her voice cracked. "Everything we've built, all the respect I've earned, it'll all be overshadowed by this. I'll just be the assistant who got pregnant by the boss." "Stop." Liam reached across the table, taking her hands. "You are the brilliant executive who saved this company, the woman I love, and now, possibly the mother of my child. None of those things diminishes the others. The board will support us, and if they don't, we'll figure something out." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "Unless, is this not what you want?" Margaret met his eyes, seeing the careful way he held himself, ready to support whatever she decided. "I want it," she whispered. "I'm just scared of losing myself, my identity, of disappointing you." "You could never disappoint me." He moved to her side of the table, drawing her close. "Do you remember what you told me during the crisis? That real partnerships mean supporting each other's strengths while protecting each other's vulnerabilities." She nodded against his shoulder. "Then let me support you now. We'll find a way to balance everything, your career, our family, all of it. Together." A memory surfaced. The diamond pendant he'd given her at the gala, his words about writing their own story. "I love you," she said softly. "Both the powerful CEO and the man who brings me coffee just the way I like it. And I love you, the brilliant executive and the woman who's about to make me a father." He pulled back slightly, eyes dancing. "And though we should probably tell the board before they read it in the tabloids." Margaret laughed. the sound lighter than it had been in weeks. William already suspects something's up. He gave me a cryptic speech about partnerships weathering storms. Wise man. Liam's hand drifted to her still flat stomach. Are you ready for this adventure? She covered his hand with hers, feeling the future shift and resettle around them. With you, always. They walked back to the office together, maintaining professional distance until the elevator doors closed. Then Liam pulled her close, his kiss full of promise and possibility. We're having a baby, he whispered against her hair, wonder in his voice. We're having a baby, she confirmed, and felt the last of her fear dissolve into joy. The elevator opened on the executive floor, and they stepped apart smoothly. CEO and Director of Strategic Initiatives once more. But something had changed, a deeper current flowing beneath their professional facades. Margaret touched the pendant at her throat as she watched Liam walk to his office. They were writing a new chapter in their story, one that would challenge every boundary they'd established. But as she felt the first flutter of movement in her belly, she knew some things were worth risking everything for. She opened her laptop, beginning to draft a new kind of strategy, one that would balance corporate leadership with impending motherhood. After all, she thought with a smile, if anyone could revolutionize work-life balance at Kane Industries, it would be them. The afternoon sun painted her office gold, and for the first time in weeks, Margaret felt truly at peace. They had faced down corporate raiders and personal demons. They could face this new adventure too, one day at a time, together. The news broke on a Wednesday morning, not through a tabloid leak or social media whisper, but in a carefully orchestrated press release from Kane Industries. CEO Liam Kane and Director of Strategic Initiatives Margaret Davis announce pregnancy, launch progressive parental leave policy. Margaret stood at the podium in the company's press room, Liam by her side, as camera flashes captured the moment. Her dark blue suit was carefully chosen to project authority, even as it softly draped her growing bump. Kane Industries has always believed in innovation, she addressed the gathered reporters. Today, we're not just announcing a personal joy, but a commitment to revolutionary change in corporate culture. Our new family leave policy will support all employees, regardless of gender or position, in balancing career ambitions with family life. The questions came rapid fire. Ms. Davis, will you be stepping down from your position? Mr. Kane, how will this affect company leadership? Are there wedding plans in the future? Liam stepped forward, his hand steady at the small of Margaret's back. Margaret Davis is one of the most brilliant executives in this industry. Her pregnancy doesn't change that. In fact, she'll be spearheading our new work-life integration initiative while continuing her current duties, with adjustments as needed for her health and our child's well-being. Later, in Margaret's office, they finally allowed themselves to breathe. That went better than expected, she sighed, slipping off her heels. You were amazing. Liam handed her a cup of herbal tea. He'd become vigilant about her caffeine intake. Though I think you enjoyed shocking the board with the policy proposal. She smiled, remembering the stunned faces as she'd presented her research on how progressive family policies improved retention and productivity. William actually teared up when we told them about the baby. He's already planning to be an honorary grandfather. Liam perched on her desk, his usual polish softening as he reached for her hand. And speaking of plans, Liam, move in with me, he said quietly. Not because of the baby or what people expect, because I want to wake up with you every morning, pregnancy cravings and all. Margaret touched the diamond pendant she still wore, his first promise to write their own story. Your penthouse is pretty far from my favorite bakery, she teased. Then we'll find a new place, something that's ours, not mine or yours. His eyes held that mixture of strength and vulnerability she'd fallen in love with. I know you value your independence. I'm not asking you to give that up, just to share it, to build something new together. A knock interrupted them. Andrea with the afternoon schedule. They shifted smoothly back into professional modes, but Margaret caught Liam's questioning glance as he left for his next meeting. She spent the afternoon in budget reviews, one hand occasionally drifting to her stomach as the baby moved. The corner office she'd fought so hard for now felt like a stepping stone rather than a destination. Success wasn't just about titles anymore. That evening, she met Charlotte for dinner, sharing the day's events over virgin mojitos. He asked you to move in, and you're hesitating. Charlotte shook her head. The man who faced down corporate raiders and changed company policy for you. It's not about Liam, Margaret sighed. It's about everything changing at once. My career, my body, my home. Sometimes I wake up wondering who I am now. You're still you, Charlotte said gently, just expanding in more ways than one. Margaret threw a napkin at her friend, laughing despite herself. I just want to do this right. All of it. Honey, you turned an office scandal into a love story and a pregnancy announcement into corporate reform. I'd say you're doing just fine. Later that night, Margaret stood in her apartment, really looking at it for the first time in weeks. The space that had once represented her independence now felt oddly empty. Her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. Missing you. The baby too. Even if she is making you crave pickled watermelon at midnight, she smiled, remembering last night's emergency grocery run. Without overthinking it, she typed back, yes. His response came quickly. Yes. Yes to moving in, to building something new, to everything. She could practically feel his smile through the phone. I love you. Both of you? The next morning, Margaret arrived early to the office, energized despite the morning sickness that still lingered. She had meetings with HR about the new policies, interviews with women's business magazines about corporate culture reform, and nursery color schemes to debate with Liam over lunch. William Brunswick caught her in the hallway, his eyes twinkling. I heard congratulations are in order, about the move. News travels fast, she observed dryly. And in good companies, like good families, it does. He squeezed her hand. You know, when Liam first told me about you two, I worried it would complicate things. But watching you both grow together, lead together, it's been a privilege. Margaret felt tears threaten. Damn hormones. Even with all the drama we caused. Especially then, real love, like real leadership, shows itself in crisis. He patted her shoulder. Now go on. You have an empire to run and a nursery to plan. She found Liam in his office, sleeves rolled up as he reviewed property listings on his tablet. He looked up with that special smile he reserved just for her. I found a place you might like. River views, close to your bakery. Margaret closed the door and crossed to his desk. In the privacy of his office, she allowed herself to drop the professional mask, letting him see all the love and excitement and fear swirling inside her. We're really doing this, she said softly. He stood, drawing her close, having second thoughts. No, she pressed her forehead to his, just grateful for all of it. His hand found her growing bump, and for a moment they simply stood there, feeling their future move beneath their joined fingers. Outside, the company they'd fought for hummed with activity. Inside, they were just Liam and Margaret, writing the next chapter of their story together. The intercom buzzed, reality calling. But as they separated, straightening clothes and composure, Margaret caught Liam's eye and smiled. Some love stories didn't end with riding into the sunset. The best ones grew stronger with every new beginning. 1 year after the kiss that changed everything, Margaret stood in the restored wine cellar of Vintage Creek, running her fingers along the oak barrels that had witnessed the beginning of their story. The estate had flourished under Kane Industries' sustainability initiative, becoming a model for eco-friendly wine production. Now it was hosting another milestone, their wedding. Though I still think it's a bit on the nose, Charlotte teased, adjusting Margaret's simple silk gown to accommodate her 8-month baby bump. Getting married where you first kissed? Where we first chose truth over appearances, Margaret corrected, touching the diamond pendant that had become her talisman. She'd refused to replace it with an engagement ring, understanding now that the truest promises weren't the ones you wore, but the ones you lived every day. Through the cellar's open door, she could hear guests arriving in the courtyard above. The intimate ceremony would include only family, close friends, and select colleagues who'd become both. Even William Brunswick had insisted on giving a toast, though doctors had advised against his travelling. "Ready?" Charlotte asked softly. Margaret caught her reflection in a vintage mirror propped against the wall. The woman who stared back wasn't the invisible assistant anymore, nor just the powerful executive. She was both and neither, simply herself, finally comfortable with all her complexities. More than ready. Upstairs, Liam waited in the courtyard that had been transformed with twinkling lights and cascading flowers. The setting sun painted the vineyard gold, reminding him of all the evenings he'd spent watching similar light play across Margaret's hair as they worked late in their offices. William Brunswick approached, leaning on his cane. Quite a different scene from that board meeting a year ago. Liam smiled, remembering his public declaration of love. "Some risks are worth taking." Speaking of risks, William nodded toward the entrance where Nathan Cole stood, looking uncomfortable in his best suit. After his insider trading he'd served community service at one of Kane Industries, environmental restoration. His request to attend the wedding had surprised everyone, especially Margaret. She's the one who insisted on inviting Liam. And said something about the importance of second chances. The music changed, and conversations hushed as Margaret appeared in the courtyard entrance. She walked alone, her choice, representing all the strength and independence she'd fought to maintain, even as she chose to share her life with him. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and suddenly they were back in that first moment in the wine cellar, when all their carefully constructed walls had crumbled in the face of something real. The ceremony was simple, their vows a mixture of professional wit and personal devotion. "I promise to be your partner in all things." Margaret's voice carried clear and strong. "To challenge you when you need challenging, support you when you need supporting, and love you even during quarterly reviews. I promise to never again mistake control for happiness," Liam responded, his thumb brushing her wedding band. "To face every adventure, board meeting, and midnight craving by your side. To show our child that true love means choosing each other every day." At the reception, William's toast brought tears to every eye. "I've seen companies built and fortunes made." The elderly board member raised his glass. "But rarely have I seen two people build something as valuable as what you have. A partnership of equals, founded on respect and strengthened by every challenge." Later, as they swayed together under the stars, Margaret felt their baby kick. "Someone's celebrating," she smiled. "Can you blame them?" Liam's hand spread protective over her bump. "It's not every day your parents make history." History? First CEO and director power couple in Kane Industries. History. First company-wide parental leave policy in the industry. First baby to attend board meetings in utero. Margaret laughed, then grew thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't kissed that day? If we'd kept our walls up?" "Sometimes." Liam tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But then I remember how exhausting it was, trying to be perfect instead of real. You taught me that true strength isn't about control, it's about being brave enough to let someone see all of you." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched their guests enjoying the evening. Nathan was deep in conversation with the environmental team about restoration projects. Charlotte was teaching William to take selfies. Through the windows of the tasting room, they could see the plaque commemorating Kane Industries' sustainability achievements. "I have something for you," Liam said suddenly, producing a small box. "If that's an engagement ring, you're a bit late," Margaret teased. Inside was a key. "To the cabin," he explained. "I bought it back, not to erase the past, but to create new memories. Our memories." Margaret touched the key, understanding the gesture. The cabin that had once represented his attempt at a perfect life would become part of their beautifully imperfect reality. Speaking of memories, she guided his hand to where their baby was kicking again. "Dr. Chen says it's a girl." Liam's eyes lit up. "A daughter." Poor Kane Industries won't know what hit it in about 30 years. Like mother, like daughter. He kissed her softly. Though maybe we teach her to fall in love with someone less complicated than her boss. Where's the fun in that? As the evening wound down, they found themselves back in the wine cellar, the place where their story began. Margaret ran her fingers along the barrel where they'd first kissed, marveling at how far they'd come. "Any regrets?" Liam asked softly. She turned to face him, this man who'd learned to choose love over appearance, truth over safety. "Only that we waited so long to be brave." Their kiss was gentle, unhurried, not the desperate passion of their first encounter, but the deep, steady love of two people who'd faced every challenge together and emerged stronger. Above them, the stars twinkled over Vintage Creek's restored vineyards, and somewhere in San Francisco, Kane Industries stood ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. But here in the wine cellar, Liam and Margaret Kane were simply themselves, two people who'd discovered that the greatest business success wasn't measured in stock prices or board votes, but in the courage to let love transform you, one brave choice at a time. Their daughter kicked again, a gentle reminder that the best chapters of their story were still to come. Margaret smiled against Liam's lips, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they'd faced everything else, together as equals, writing their own rules for happily ever after. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.